All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. I am Phil Fisher, the director of the Stanford Center on Early Childhood and professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Education, and I will be hosting this webinar today. I would like to invite participants to please introduce yourselves in the chat, and that way we'll know who's joining us. I should probably have started by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because we have a broad span of time zones that are joining us for this call. So let me begin just by saying that this webinar is co-sponsored by the Stanford Center on Early Childhood and the Stanford King Center. In just a few words, the Stanford Center on Early Childhood is really dedicated to the idea that each and every child thrives from the start. Our work is based in a university setting, but is very much outwardly facing. We are very oriented to the lives of young children and the adults surrounding the lives of young children. And we have for now a number of years been working on a variety of projects, some of them domestically in the US, and we'll be starting to do some international work soon that are really focused on developing tools to make sure that communities, community organizations, policymakers, advocates, and other researchers have the information and the wherewithal to be able to make sure that all children thrive from the start. Joining me today are two esteemed colleagues. So first, let me introduce Rukmini Banerji. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Pratham Education Foundation. She's trained as an economist at St. Stephen's College in Delhi and the Delhi School of Economics. She was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University and completed her PhD at the University of Chicago in the US in 1991. She then returned to India in 1996 and joined Pratham. And over the years, she's worked extensively in Pratham's education programs in both rural and urban areas. Along with her team, she's played a major role in designing and supporting large-scale partnerships with state governments in India for improving children's learning outcomes. Rukmini led Pratham's research and assessment efforts, including the annual Status of Education Report, or AUSER, exercise from 2005 to 2014, and we'll be talking a little bit about that during this webinar. She's, since 2015, has been the CEO of Pratham. In 2008, Rukmini received the Maulana Abdul Kalam Shiksha Puraskar by the government of Bihar, India. She was the first recipient of this award, and in 2021, she was awarded the Edan Prize for Educational Development. Originally from Bihar, she's now based in New Delhi and Pune. Rukmini writes frequently on education in both Hindi and English dailies in India and enjoys writing books and stories for children. And we also have a special guest joining us. Joan Lombardi, my dear colleague and friend, is a senior advisor and adjunct faculty member here at Stanford University and to the Center on Early Childhood. She has a decades-long career and commitment in domestic government and policy at the federal level, having served in 3 presidential administrations in the US with an expertise focusing on young children and families. She also has done extensive work globally in countries around the world, supporting efforts to make sure that young children thrive from the start. So let me just start by welcoming you both and saying thank you so much for joining this webinar.
Phil, great to be here.
Joan, I'm wondering if you would like to lead things off with a few questions.
Sure.
Yeah, and just giving us a little bit of background, and then Rukmini, I know, has some pictures that she's going to share as well once we've heard from you.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Phil, and thank Rukmini. I'm really delighted that we have people in the audience from India, from the United States, and other places around the world to learn from each other, because so many of our themes are similar. I'm going to turn it right away to Rukmini, who I think has a video to share with us to give us a little context of what's going on in India today.
गणित ही पढ़ाएंगे हम या फिर रंगों की ही पहचान कराएंगे, तो उनका सामाजिक विकास, बौद्धिक विकास, मानसिक विकास, उनके भावनात्मक विकास, उनके संपूर्ण विकास के ऊपर हम लोग को ध्यान देना है।
एक इकोसिस्टम तैयार करने की कोशिश की जा रही है जिसमें समाज, माता पिता और स्कूल मिलकर कार्य करें और बच्चों को अर्ली चाइल्डहुड में तैयार करें ताकि बच्चों की नींव अच्छी तरह तैयार हो जाए। जब हम देखते हैं जो बच्चा हमारे पास प्री प्राइमरी में है, जब वो क्लास फर्स्ट में जाता है और वो बड़े ही कॉन्फिडेंस के साथ किसी क्वेश्चन का आंसर दे रहा है, वहाँ पे उसकी आंखों में चमक होती है और खुशी खुशी के साथ वो क्लास में पार्टिसिपेट कर रहा है, तो ये देख के हमारे मन में जो खुशी होती है वो किसी और काम से नहीं हो सकती।
Meany, so much unites us, and thank you for that great introduction. Over to you.
I think this video brings smiles to everyone when you watch it, but it's also, we picked it. A lot of our colleagues, we were discussing what would be the one video we'd like to show all of you. And I think this one captures I feel a very historic moment in India's history for a number of reasons. And let me lay that out for you. We have a new national education policy, which was announced in 2020, right in the middle of COVID. But what that policy did, which is historic, according to many of us, is that it brought early childhood very much into the center of the whole story. So earlier, India's education system formally began in first grade, but now the age 3 to age 8 is the first building block of the education system. And this age group is seen as a continuum. So it's called the foundational stage. And it's a big, big step because it means that you have to make arrangements and build the connections from age 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 is the official age to get into first grade. The policy, I think, provides a very strong rationale for doing many things that many people in India, especially in the early childhood years, have wanted to do. And it has provided a lot of opportunity to come up with different permutation combinations of what is possible in this age group. We have, as many of you may know, a early childhood sort of development and care provisions, which are provided by our Ministry of Women and Child for age 0 to age 6. And then, of course, the school system kicks in at age 6. But these two existing structures are working quite hard to come together. And then I think the fact that this policy came up during COVID provided a COVID context as well. And as many of you know, India had one of the longest institutional schools or preschool closures, almost 2 years. And in that period, everywhere across all income classes, all geographical locations, I think families began to play a very important role. So we see this moment as somewhere where you can think about this continuum. The continuum is there in our system now. It also emphasizes that this is a progression and that there is a breadth of skills, not just very academic skills, but a whole breadth of skills that need to be nurtured. And I think the third part is there is a big role to be played by families. So in the film, I don't know if it was as clear, but there was clearly our Anganwadi system, which is our the early childhood care and development centers. There was clearly mothers and families, as you could see. And then there was the first grade teacher as well. And this is the sort of the, almost you can say, the consortium of people who I feel can be in a very good position to take this building of good foundations early on. In our own work, we refer to this as a leap forward moment. And hopefully, Joan, you will ask us enough questions that we can show you that this leap forward is actually beginning to happen.
Yeah, that's a
Back
great.
to you.
I'm really excited to see this policy emerge in India, and talk a little bit more with me about the continuum, because I know you do leap forward, and how does that continue? Because we're trying to make those linkages everywhere around the world.
So, we looked at the data that existed, and, we do this big survey, we'll talk about it a little bit later, where we've been tracking where young children actually go. And so there's a wide variety of options. The options may not be available to everyone in every location, but you can be in our Anganwadi, which is the early childhood care and development kind of centers, which often are community-based, but also can be part of a school complex. There are preschools which are run by private, maybe very small local or bigger institutions. We also have now, as part of the continuum, several state governments in India who are bringing in pre-primary grades into the school. And then, of course, there is first grade and second grade. So this age 3 to age 8, the requirement is that there has to be a government provision of somewhere where these kids can go. But the provisions could be across this, variety of institutional arrangements. But everywhere there is a need to think about how do you move from one to the next, so that this entire is a stage and not just 5 grades put together.
How do we continue to reinforce that continuity, Phil? I know you've thought a lot about this, and of course we talk a lot here about starting prenatally and including those very early years. Any reaction?
Yeah, I mean, Rukmini, it's so exciting to hear about a national program that starts at age 3 in India. In the US, we've seen very slow progress in extending formal schooling downwards. In some states, we've implemented pre-kindergarten. That includes in California, which started this program approximately 3 years ago. But we know that the earliest learning begins really in the very earliest stages of life. And so the more that we can emphasize the need to have supportive early learning environments, I think the absolute better things will be. I think that the idea that there's an institutional and governmental commitment to this really speaks quite highly of how much people are coming to understand the importance of these early years for children's education. So very exciting to see this taking root. Would love to see sort of more and more of it happening in the US and in other countries around the globe as well.
Yeah, Rukmini, could you tell, I know there was a long story leading up to the implementation of the policy originally. It was not in the policy. How did the whole community come together across India to help make that happen?
I think the policy changes have been happening in the early childhood years for a while. The early childhood curriculum frameworks, the sort of systematizing what is expected. But it was being done for that 3 to 6 age group separately, and for the 6 and above separately. What the new education policy has done is kind of bring it together. And this idea that this is a stage as opposed to a whole set of grades. In practicality, you'll still go from first grade to second grade. But I think there is a sense in which this is a progression, this is a continuum. It's a continuum of provision. It's a continuum of what children are expected to do. And in some ways, I think our hope from Pratham is that this will lead to kind of a preschoolification of the early grades in school rather than the schoolification of the early childhood system.
Okay.
Now, that is, I think, a challenge that we all have to, work with, because there is a notion of what school is. And if this early childhood gets into the school setting, will it get very formalized? And I think that is why it is a very fertile and very big opportunity right now. But I wanted to make one more mention of something that we are seeing in India. And I'm not sure, perhaps in other parts of Asia and Africa, this may be the case as well. If you compare the education level of parents, particularly of young mothers who are the mothers of this age group, even 10 years ago, the profile was very different. You had a lot of young mothers 10, 12 years ago who didn't have much schooling. But we are seeing the benefits of universalizing elementary education over the last 10, 15 years in the form of mothers who now have substantial numbers of years of schooling. So we looked at some data from 2024, and we see that there are only 3 or 4 states in the country, rural, I'm talking about rural data, where you have less than half the mothers with less than 5th grade education. So we suddenly have a big demographic advantage, almost, you can say. So on the one hand, you have young mothers and fathers whose education levels, at least years of schooling, has really gone up because of the elementary school universalization. And on the other hand, we see another phenomena which economists often look at as worrying, which is that we have quite low female labor force participation, especially for young women and especially in rural areas. But if you look at it from an early childhood and early years point of view, I feel that we are sitting on kind of a pot of gold for the moment, at least, because we have families, unlike perhaps what you see in the US, where there is a real struggle between working mothers and what to do with childcare for children. In our case, I think partly the structure of families, partly the fact, which, again, viewed in different ways, you can come to different conclusions, that women are not working outside their own farm or own home, very much in rural areas, allows them to be available to be real learning supports for their children and to be supportive of the institutional structure into which their children go as well. And I'll talk more about the fact about how we have worked on, groups and with mothers and so on.
So let me comment just a few things. I'm so happy to, hear you talk about how important maternal education is, because we know that's an indicator of how children are doing later on. So we can't separate them. And of course, taking the culture of preschool up through the early grades is so important. I know in many urban areas, of course, there is the issue of families working and mothers working. So how we integrate that into our system is so important. Any comments on that, Phil?
I just really wanted to capture the term that you used, Rukmini, of the preschoolification of public education. I think it's so important. We have for years known through extensive research that children's social and emotional development is really the foundation on which later schooling is really built. And at the same time, we've had these divides in education systems around the world and in the US, where there's preschool and then there's the formal education that begins at whatever age. And I think the idea that you're seeing this as a developmental continuum and you're thinking of the basic core life skills that children need around identifying and regulation of their emotions, around being able to solve problems, being able to engage in social interactions effectively with others, are really necessary as a starting point from which you can then begin to build literacy and numeracy. And so the idea of this developmental continuum, and not really, as you put it, of extending sort of the kindergarten classroom downwards, but rather moving preschool up, is exactly what I think we need in order to produce really positive educational outcomes. So I will quote you on that term moving forward because
No,
I just thought it was really powerful.
So the term or the idea is actually not mine. We have a lot of people who have worked in early childhood for many years in India. And one of the people that we all in Pratham look up to is someone called Vinita Kaul. And she is the one that I think had used to say this, that, you know, we're not there, but we need a preschoolification. There's no reason why suddenly in first grade, you talk only about reading and math.
That's right.
Whereas just the year before, there's so much work going on in, you know, doing cognitive activities, which are not numbers or not, you know, letters, but so many other things. In the video, I don't know if you could catch it, you could see the mother and the child was, you know, taking out vegetables and they were placing it in, you know, with the similar other vegetables. There was another scene where they've taken the glasses from the kitchen and they were piling it one on top of the other. And these are small things, but I think they're big things. And they're really effective when mothers do them, to say there's so much stuff that you can do at home in the community, which doesn't involve, you know, buying things, but which involves really interacting with children on a whole bunch of activities that are actually fun to do.
Those everyday activities are really those moments of learning, right? And I thank you for mentioning Dr. Vinita Kaul, who's been a mentor to so many of us around the world. And you know, you mentioned the community, Rukmini. How has Pratham integrated the community into their approach?
So, you know, our history, we are 30 years old this year. And the beginnings of Pratham, which were in Mumbai, in Bombay, and I'm very happy that among the participants, there's quite a lot of Pratham people, including some people from whom I learned many of the things that I know today. So we started in Mumbai, and our founders, Madhav Chavan and Farida Lambe, were both university professors. And their idea was that as a societal movement, you need to figure out what is the gap in the system and then try to fill that gap, because systems exist. If you are going to add something of value from the outside. And at that time, in 1996, 97, we didn't have a very well worked out system of these Anganwadis, the early childhood, you know, development care centers for urban areas. Further, Mumbai suffered from the fact that much of Bombay, if you've been there, is actually not supposed to be there. So these are unauthorized, you know, slum areas, where providing government services would mean that then you're kind of acknowledging that they're there. So a big gap that our founders saw was that a lot of people migrate to this big city, often live in quite difficult circumstances, and are not connected to the school system. And so we came up with this idea that you could have very small community-based little preschool centers run by somebody from the community, very close to the children's homes, which would act as a bridge, would act as a place where people would come together, but would act as a bridge both for the children and their families to go into the actual formal school. And our idea at that time was that if you had universal preschool, you would have universal first grade, and then you would have universal primary education. So that's the premise on which a lot of the work that Pratham did in the initial years began. And I think that's, we've had a belief that the real solutions can come when communities get together and work with the institutional system to do it. And sometimes it just needs a little bit of glue to bring people together. If I fast forward to, you know, COVID or just before the COVID time, we could see the fact that there is this growing interest that families have, particularly mothers have. And during COVID, the only way to reach the communities in which we had been working with younger and older children was really through the cell phones of the parents. And therefore, we formed these little groups, which were originally groups that were connected through a cell phone, which were like neighborhood groups, not even a village group, but just the immediate neighborhood in which you were. And at that time, even 4 or 5 years ago, not everybody had a smartphone. So we would make the point person, the person who had a smartphone. In fact, my colleague Smithin, who's probably on the call, started off by calling them smart mothers. And then the other mothers didn't like it. So now we call them leader mothers. And the person with the smartphone would get videos and messages of activities to do. And then the group would do them together, and then they would do it with their kids. This began during COVID, and we found that this was a very effective way. So now almost everywhere that Pratham works, when we work directly in the community or with institutions, and also when we work in partnership with government, this idea that mothers groups must be an integral part of this whole ecosystem. Having read your paper now, I'm careful because there are many systems, but in the immediate local context, the child, the family, and then the community around must have this supporting mechanism that helps the child, helps each other, and then also helps the school or the Anganwadi as needed. So for us, community has been a key piece of everything we've done, but we've seen the kind of the social structures evolve over time. And now with the availability of being able to connect both directly and from remote, it increases the possibilities of how you bring people together.
Yes, and it's music to our ears to talk about community systems. And Phil, we've both been writing about this. I wonder you would comment on the new ecology and how you see it fitting here.
Yes, it's so exciting for me to hear about the kind of the connection between young children, the educational environments, families, and communities. As Joan mentioned, Joan and I recently authored a working paper that's posted on our center's website called The New Ecology of Early Childhood. And really the thinking behind this, which is forming our framework for our center, is not any kind of new idea. It's that really children exist in a variety of contexts. They exist first and foremost in the immediate context of their parents and other caregivers who might live in the home with them, but they also exist in a broader context of the early care and education environments that they're in. And then those both family and care environments are embedded in communities and in cultural values and in a variety of sort of further out kinds of influences. And government policies and other kinds of local policies can have a huge impact on everything that's sort of within that set of concentric circles. So we've been thinking a lot about what in the new ecology of children's lives, what are the biggest challenges that families are facing, and how do we really ensure that children continue to have the best possible outcomes in the ways that the world is changing. And that has to do with things like climate. It has to do with things like the persistence of poverty and inequality, things that we know are really critical. Even the issue of what digital technology is bringing is a really interesting one. And as you mentioned, I think a lot of people have concerns about how digital technology and screens might affect children's learning. But we've also seen in instances like the pandemic, or when people live in remote locations, that digital technology is a way to help bring people together and to create more of that community context around young children and the adults in their lives. So we're very happy to share this set of ideas that Joan and I have authored. I think it's in the link now in the chat, and we would encourage people who are on this call to take a look at it and to send us your ideas, because our thinking about this has largely been informed by the conversations like this that we're having today about people who are very much engaged in and concerned about young children, and who are thinking about what are the challenges, what are the bright spots and opportunities that we can really bring out in the current context.
If I can add a bit, Joan, to this notion about technology and young children. In much of our work, and also in the work that now we are doing in partnership with governments, we've done a few studies, and I think they need to be done in a more systematic way, about what does being in a group bring to the members of the group. Now, remember that the group is actually the mothers, and of course, each of them has 1 or 2 children. But we saw 2 things in a slightly deeper dive that we did. One was that if you were a mother who did not have access to a smartphone or to a cell phone, and you were not part of a group, then you were quite disadvantaged, both in terms of what you knew about child development and also about how your child was doing. But with the same kind of profile, if you were part of a smaller group where somebody had that device, but was sharing with the group, the inputs that you got through the device, then it had a big equalizing influence. So at one level, if it is all personal and one-on-one, then perhaps the divide increases. But if you have a way in which you can share these resources, then I think it can have an equalizing effect where you share, what you know with others, the inputs that come get, circulated quite evenly. And so we feel that the social structure into which, remote messages land can play a very important role in how that affects the members of that group.
We've just begun to think about those things, right? And with technology, and I think you're so right, we need so much more research. We've been talking about how it's the family ecology and technology and how it affects the relationships among members of the families. But I want to come back to one thing. We've been talking a lot about mothers, but we know that fathers play a central role. Phil has become, not so recently, but within the last few years, a grandfather himself. So Phil, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're seeing bringing the voice of fathers into the picture also?
Yes, we understand that in many contexts, the thinking has historically been that families and young children equals mothers, but we know that fathers in many instances play a very key role. And in some of the information that we've been gathering, we continue to see that really ways in which it's possible to include fathers in the kind of playful learning that you were talking about, Rukmini, can be really critical. I think fathers maybe see their roles in some instances as to just be doing sort of more formal teaching or other kinds of things with the child, or in some instances, their work schedules may make it difficult for them to contribute at the same level. But nevertheless, again and again, data shows that when fathers engage in particular in playful learning, that it has a kind of a multiplier effect on children's development and on their learning and academic achievement. So we certainly think that that's another really key issue in the lives of young children. And yes, Joan, I have to say that doesn't just apply to fathers, but also to grandfathers.
Wow, yes.
I spend an awful lot of time engaged in playful learning with my 2- and 4-year-old granddaughters.
Well, do it now.
Yes, sir. I don't have a video I can pull out immediately, but we can send it later. One of the co-leaders of our early childhood program in Pratham in India is Smithin, who's a young man, and he has some videos of games and activities that he's doing with his son. And I think in one of the videos, they're both wearing blue t-shirts. And when we send out these videos, very often those who are looking at it will send back reactions, send back their own videos. And I believe in response to one of those videos, we had videos of fathers playing with their children wearing blue t-shirts, because that was part of the...
Well, actually,
So again, yeah.
Rukmini, I think I met Smitten because of those videos, and he put it in the chat. So I
Yes.
encourage everyone to save that link from Smitten and to watch those. They're really great videos. I want to turn, both of you collect data. And I know you collect different kind of data, but I want to ask each of you a little bit about your data collection. And I know you've got a few slides. Maggie's ready with those slides to talk a little about ASR and what you do in India for those who may not be as familiar.
So ASR stands for this Annual Status of Education Report. We've been doing it since 2005. And essentially what it is we take a district in India could have anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 schools. And we look at the district as a unit because a lot of the planning for education in India, especially in rural India, happens at the district level. So lots of stories of the past, but I want to show you a little bit about 2024, where we tried to go to almost every rural district in India. And the data set that comes from each district is from 30 villages and 20 randomly sampled households in each village. But when you put together all of this, this last round reached close to 700,000 children. And this is an age group from 3 to 16. So for the 3 to 5-year-olds, it's just information about, are you in school or are you in any kind of a preschool? And then thereafter, it is answering 3 questions. Are you in school? Can you do basic reading? And can you do basic arithmetic? It's actually targeted at kids who are in school, but we've been actually collecting information about where do young children go? And that's been quite valuable. If we move to the next slide, it'll give you a sense of how we do it. 30 villages, 20 households, one-on-one assessment, basic reading. And I want to show you the tool that we use, which is, I think, on the next slide. It's used in, we have about 20 languages we do this in. Starts very simply. Can you read letters? Can you read words? And, I have to say that we need to come up with the early childhood version of this. This is really geared at foundational learning for essentially grades 2 to maybe, grades 8. And we've done some work on early childhood, which could be, wider and more representative of this breadth of skills. But if you just look at this, the idea behind USSR when we started was that years of schooling were going up, enrollment was going up, but there was a worry that it was not being matched by equal years of learning. And so this has been something that we've used for a long time. Before I stop, I want to just show you a little bit about where we've reached in 2024. So Maggie, maybe the next slide will show that. So this is children in grade 3. And for us, grade 3 is that point which is at the end of the first foundational stage. And the national goal is that by grade 3, almost all children should have the basic foundational skills. Here, the foundational skills are based on a very simple reading. The highest level is like a little story. And for third grade or second grade, can you do a subtraction problem with, borrowing? These are the 2 kind of proxies for what we are calling foundational learning. And if you look at this 10-year period, you see that from 14 to 2018, both reading and math for third graders are going up. So this is the percentage of kids in third grade who are, let us say, at third grade level, or at least at second grade level. Along comes COVID, 2 years are gone, there's a dip. But after 2022, you can see a big surge up. And this cohort of third graders in 2024 began first grade after COVID and after the new education policy was in place. So they may have had an interrupted early childhood because of COVID. But I think what you see here is an accumulation of many things that the new education policy is striving towards. Especially the math numbers are the biggest jump we've seen so far. So for us, I think seeing these numbers, us meaning anybody in India, it gave a real sense that policy is being translated into practice. And I think I feel like everybody was really happy to see that if you do the right things at the right time, this leap forward that we're talking about can really happen. Last slide to show you variations across the country. It's a big country. Don't worry about the alphabets on the y-axis. These are different states. And the yellow is where third grade math was in 2022. And almost everywhere the green is much higher. In some places, a lot higher. In some places, a little higher. But this increase is across the board. And we feel that this kind of big change happens when policy at the top and action from below go together. So that's it from USSR, from me. But this is just very simple data, but collected in a very large scale and by kind of ordinary people. So
I really appreciate that. And, I feel like we should have a dialogue across borders here about grade level reading and math and how those foundational early years make a difference to that. And policy matters, right, Rukmini? I couldn't say it any better. Phil, you collect a different kind of data, but learning a lot about both family conditions and childcare, which is so critical, particularly as we see urbanization. Can you talk a little bit about RAPID?
Yes, but first I have to say, Rukmini, we oftentimes talk with wonder about our survey, which has gotten information from about 60,000 parents and about 15,000 early care and education providers. And so when I see your numbers of 300,000 of direct assessment, of course, you know, we're humbled as always. I also just wanted to comment.
Phil, we are a big crowded country, so
Yes,
I don't think.
Yes, but I know each one of those data points takes time and effort. So very, very impressive. The other thing that's impressive, I'll move on to our own survey data shortly, but I think the amount of learning loss that you documented immediately post-pandemic is something that we've seen in the US as well. But the kind of catch-up that you're also showing subsequent to that first year post-pandemic is quite impressive. And then lastly, I think it is quite noteworthy that there's variation across the various parts of the country. We see this as well in all data. And one of our center's really primary efforts is to not just look at large kind of average numbers, but to really begin to look at the variation and say, where are things going better than expected, but also where can we do better than is currently the case. And so I think it's quite interesting. And I'm just glad that you shared that sort of variations across the country slide, because I think we often gloss over those and say, see, on average, things look great, as opposed to really looking more granularly. Our survey is called Rapid. Joan and I have been involved, as have many of our amazing team members here at our center, starting in April of 2020, so right when the pandemic was beginning. We have endeavored to really document amongst parents of children aged 5 and under, and among people who take care of young children, what the circumstances are that they're facing. And so that means looking at their economic circumstances, their ability to access basic resources like food and housing, as well as their own and their children's well-being, and their access to things like childcare and healthcare. I think one of the biggest takeaways from our survey over the last 5 years has been that the well-being of children is so strongly tied to the well-being of adults. And the well-being of adults, both parents and early care and education professionals, has a lot to do with their own economic circumstances. So consistently, when we see that people report that they can't pay for their basic needs in a given month, that they struggle, and that then gets passed along to their children. And this has been ongoing from the pandemic. And we've recently partnered with Abby Rakes at the University of Nebraska to not only look at emotional well-being of children, but to look at their developmental status and the extent to which they are or aren't on track for learning. And we similarly find that this chain reaction from hardship, economic hardship and material hardship, through adult distress, then also impacts children's developmental status. So we see this as a significant issue here in the US, especially in the current circumstances that we're facing, to make sure that adults in the lives of young children have enough to get by. Just to give you an example of some recent data, we're finding that among early care and education providers, and again, US is a very wealthy country, but we've been finding consistently over the last 6 months that 70% of people who take care of children report that in a given month they can't pay for a basic need like food or housing or their electricity or water. So, these are things that we're very concerned about. The last thing I want to say, and this touches on some of your earlier points, is that there are some bright spots in our survey. So in particular, when parents report that even amidst some of these difficulties, they're able to maintain regular daily routines, which we know are extremely important for young children's ability to learn and develop, and that they're spending quality time, playful and enjoyable time with their children, that these things really seem to buffer against some of these difficulties that families and educators are facing. So we'll continue to collect that data around the US. We're doing a national set of surveys. We also do more local surveys in states within the US and in communities. And we're just starting to launch some of our international work with a partnership in northern Mexico at a university there. Looking forward to continuing that work. Oh, Joan, you have muted.
Sorry, there's so many questions coming in, but Rukmini, any reaction to what Phil just said and what we're finding here?
I mean, I think that this, one of your recommendations from your paper is how much more research we need to do. So when Phil was talking, I was thinking that even in a village in India or in a urban area, we have in the same community different neighborhoods. And sometimes these neighborhoods are, of different socioeconomic, backgrounds. And that we need to look at how does the interaction within a group of mothers in a much poorer neighborhood compare to that in a better off, while we know that within the group there is equalizing influences. How does a group which is maybe not with each other but they do meet, like in Maharashtra, which is one of our biggest states, there are mothers groups in every village as part of a state program to help to go towards these goals for third grade. And there, these mothers meet in their own neighborhoods, but they also come together in school for an activity workshop with the teachers. So I'm really curious after hearing Phil, how does these variations within a village, do they, is there a equalizing or a more equitable sharing of knowledge and behaviors otherwise? So lots of things to be studied. And, it's really fascinating to hear these different contexts in which you're doing these things.
Yeah, and I must say that what we're excited about here, but all around the world, is where communities are coming together across program types. And in India, you have so many wonderful models of how people are coming together and saying, let's make this the best place to raise a child, and how does the health system work with the childcare system, and vice versa. But I also want to pose to both of you a question that came in the chat about both of these efforts, these data collection efforts, are outside the public system. And, you're collecting your data in Author outside the public system, and you are also Phil. Can you talk a little bit about that? And do you see any way they can be more integrated into government policy and systems?
So if I go first, ASER is a household survey. And the reason it's a household survey is if you want to find a representative sample of children, you can't find it in a particular kind of school. So while we have a very big public school system and also a big public early childhood system, there is other alternatives, and there are children who are not part of any of those. So therefore, the household survey is the way to catch all children, at least all children who live with families and in homes. Now, as far as it being outside the system, yes, it is the information is collected by a local group of citizens. But then if you look deeper within the ASER activity, we have these government teacher training colleges in many districts in India. And one of the biggest partners of this exercise is the teacher trainees of these teacher training institutions. And I feel that is one way in which they are trainees, they are students, but they are students of a certain government system where they hopefully take this, when they do their practice lessons, they do it inside a school. But this stuff makes you interact with families. You have to hear what people in the village are saying. And I feel that there's a school system or a government system, then there is our social system. And again, going back to your concentric circles or overlapping circles, it's part of both. I mean, as citizens of India, you're part both of a education system, but also of a social system. The results of ASER are, hotly debated, every time they come out. And what we find interesting is it's hotly debated from the district level upwards. And so, whether you may like it, you may dislike it, but it's very difficult to remain unaffected, shall we say. And we would like to think that this repeated effort over 20 years has actually played some role in influencing, how important this business of learning has now become, both in India and globally. So citizens of a country have a duty almost, I feel, to really take a temperature check of where are we, because the solutions have to come from everywhere. You know, if we have close to universal schooling in India today, it's because parents, communities, and governments together felt that this was important. And I think the moment we are in, where we are saying that if you do things right in the early years, it requires everyone to come together.
Absolutely. And I'm really heartened by how you brought the voices of families into the education system. And that's exciting. That's exciting to hear the integration. Phil, I'm sure you have the same response.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I want to add to what Rukmini is saying, that from our perspective, first of all, although we are based in a university setting, that all of our data collection is really designed around partnerships with organizations. Sometimes they're NGOs, sometimes they're government organizations who are in need of the data. And I think we have good capacity for gathering and summarizing, analyzing the data, and getting it back out. But we do not see, as has been an unfortunate, I think, case in the past in some instances, that this is just a one-way direction of data coming to the university and staying here. We really endeavored to have it be part of a larger ecosystem where it's really being used for positive impact. And relatedly, I think sometimes government organizations and others can be worried about what comes out in data. It can promote the kind of debates that Rukmini is talking about. We very strongly take the position that what data allows for is learning and improvement, and that what we can do is always endeavor to make our programs, our supports, our policies that are designed to support young children and the adults in their lives better, and in particular, better by understanding who's not benefiting and what kinds of supports would be helpful for those who are really being forgotten or falling into the cracks. And so from our perspective, data is not to say you've done a great job or you're doing a terrible job, but really to learn where the opportunities are to make things better and to continue to drive in that direction.
And the voices of parents matter. I mean, I'm both saying that caregivers matter. And I think we're all excited about that. Well, I'm going to end this by asking Rukmini to share. I think everyone knows that for me, this is like bringing a family together, to have Rukmini together, to have the US and India represented. But Rukmini, I know you're doing some great melas in
Yes.
children ready for school and to spread the word about entering school. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
And can I show you? Because that's easier than talking. So I want to just show you some pictures of what we call a school readiness mela. Mela means a fair. So this is often happens in many parts of India, that in April, before the summer holidays, you welcome children into this mela, which you will see. And then after the summer holidays, the children will actually go into first grade. So if you go to the next slide, Maggie. So this is an invitation to come to the mela, being given out by young people in the village. And you use, we have a lot of these cards, which are actually wedding cards, but you can use the back of it. So it's basically inviting people to come to the mela. Next. So mela begins. It happens here. Again, the setting is, you see these little desks. So you can always find these, whether it's from the school or from somewhere else, because this is actually how we do our elections. When you do elections, you first go to one booth, then to the next, and then to the next. So it's a very familiar format. So there's a little report card that you can see here. And actually, this is a village volunteer who is manning the first booth. So let's go to the next one. Yes, Caitlin, they're really fun. So everyone's waiting for the first mom, and you have to be a duo. You can't come alone. Mother and child have to come together. All siblings are welcome. Everybody else is welcome. But the activity has to be done by these. So here's the mom. This is a village in Rajasthan. And there's a very typical kind of outfit that she's wearing. And this part was added by people in the village, that when they come in, why not take the height and weight? because our Anganwadis have usually a weighing machine. So that's first height and weight. Then let's go further. And now everybody's watching to see what is going on. Okay. Now you see the gentleman with the pink turban on his head. He is the headman of the village. And when we approached him that day, he said he was a very busy guy, and this is happening outside the village council's kind of rooms. And he said he's going to be very busy. Now watch what happens. Go to the next one. So one of the first booths is physical activities. So you walk on a straight line, then you walk on a curvy line. And so here are the kids working on the curvy line. Now I noticed while this was going on that Mr. Headman got very involved in encouraging these children to walk on this line. And at some point he went and got a bunch of biscuits, cookies, and he was giving one cookie out to every kid who finished walking on whatever it is, the activity that was going on. Okay, next. Now we come to a counter, which is about fine motor skills. And here, what the kids have to do is to do certain things with folding paper, both the mom and child. And you can see that everyone is very involved. Older kids are also involved in trying to figure out what this is. This is all a way of kind of both engaging the mother, but also showing that there are so many things you can do at home with the simple resources that you have at home. And all of this counts towards this breadth of skills that we are trying to build a public understanding of. Okay, next. Now, this is the sorting table, and there are lots of activities you can do this. Separate the onions from the potatoes, arrange them in ascending order. There is stuff that you do with the stones. And so, in different melas, people will bring different things, but we think that this arranging, sorting, categorizing, sequencing are just fun things to do. And so it can be done by anybody, anywhere. Okay, next. Now comes this table is for probably, I can't see, it's probably the drawing one or the language one, but you can see that the crowds are building up, and lots of older kids are around and really wanting to participate, but they have to be told you're already in school now, just watch. Okay, next one. The coloring one is often the most popular, and sometimes we have to tell mothers to give their kids a chance to color, and many mothers say, we didn't get a chance to color when we were young. So it's a fun activity, and I think it's a very nice activity for both mothers and kids to do together. Next. Here's a language one where there's a bunch of different things. You look at a picture, you say what the picture is, you maybe recognize a few letters, then you go to the shapes. There is a bunch of things to do with shapes and with numbers, all very, very simple and locally made stuff. And you can't see the rest of the crowd, but there's a huge crowd now, and everybody is watching. The center of attention is the mother and child going from one booth to the other. Next.
You're building a public awareness about early childhood.
Correct. And now Mr. Headman hasn't gone away, because in this particular case, there was a little kit that every mother and child were given to take away. And he made sure that he was the one handing out. And the idea was, through the summer holidays, do these activities with your children. So it's very serious. You see the child and the mother holding the little kit that they're getting. And the story is not completely over. Go to the next slide. This is a grandmother, and she was very annoyed that she was not allowed to really enter and be the key. So then finally, everyone melted and said, Grandma, you can come in as well, and let us show you what you have to do with your kids. So variations of this are happening everywhere. The basic idea is give importance to the mother-child interaction. Again, Phil, fathers would be welcome here as well. But the center of attention is the child and the parents, in this case, the mothers. And everybody watches because we want to give this young mother the importance that it deserves. And very often the school teacher as well as the Anganwadi teachers are also part of this. So they are part of this transition. And of course, this, increasing the public understanding that all of this is a whole breadth of skills and not only letters and numbers is part of this exercise. So since you guys can't come to a Mela easily, we welcome all of you. Whenever you come to India, we will do a Mela for you.
I will take you up on that, and I think we've started a movement of Kinder Melas around the world now. Thank you, and thank you to everyone in India, all the many organizations that work on behalf of children in rural areas and in urban areas. Phil, I'm going to give you the last word.
Just thank you so much for joining us, Rukmini. Thank you, Joan, for your superb moderation skills and your deep knowledge of early childhood around the world. We look forward to hearing from participants in this webinar, and please keep up the good work that all of you are doing to support young children and the adults in their lives.